there. We are the Chaos. I'm SF Rogers.
And the Ogle.
And we're in the same room today.
Absolutely weird.
We are joined today by the one and only Nicholas Grady, author of Under the Bluffs and his new release, Under the Water.
So, Nick, introduce yourself. Tell everybody who you are.
Sure. My name is Nicholas Grady. I live in Robbinsdale, Minnesota. Primarily work as a special education teacher, but I'm also a self-published author. And I've got 2 books out. The first one, Under the Bluffs, came out in April of 2023. This one is a dark mystery suspense novel about unsolved kidnapping cases involving the abandoned caves of St. Paul that takes place in the 80s and 90s. And that one came out in 2023. It's been out for, like I said, a little over a year. Done fairly well, sold a decent amount of copies. And then just this last April, I released my second book, Under the Water, which is a sequel to Under the Bluffs. And this one has to do with a mysterious cult that is attacking people along the river parkways in Minneapolis. People are disappearing and the cops are trying to kind of figure out what's going on and try and get to the bottom of it. So all of my books, at least so far, are mystery suspense novels, and I have a third one in this series that will be coming out around April of next year as well. And that one has been written. I'm still working on it, tweaking it, but I've at least gotten well past the first draft stage of that one.
Cool. That's really cool. You're just trucking along, aren't you?
So far, although I don't have any ideas for anything new. Like after the third book, nothing has no ideas have really gotten. I have one little idea, but I don't know if I'm going to make it work or
not. We get that. It's one of those things that once you get done with a big project like that, you're like, what do I do next?
Where do I go?
Where do I go? But I'm sure it's kind of like, getting a tattoo. You get one and you can't stop getting one after that. So I'm sure another book will come to you eventually.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll come up with something eventually.
Well, for those people that don't know, Nick was on with us close to about a year ago.
Yes.
He was one of the very first guests we had on the Author's Chaos. We're really excited to welcome him back. So you have all of these books that you have written. They are in a series of books, right? They follow one another.
Correct. Each book is kind of its own standalone story, but the characters age and progress with each story. So all of the books kind of revolve around, the 3 main characters in all 3 books are a detective named Ron Clark and these 2 kind of younger urban explorer guys named Tony Jankowski and Jeff Larson. In the first book, Tony and Jeff are just out of high school, and they kind of connect with Ron because they know the cave systems in St. Paul, and he kind of uses their knowledge of this to try and solve the crime and enlist their help. And in the second book, they come back and assist him again with a new sort of mystery suspense. By the third book, Tony's already become a cop, and Jeff is already working as a firefighter and EMT. So they kind of, age-wise and maturity-wise progress as the books go on. But yeah, each book is kind of a standalone story featuring these characters, kind of in the same way if you think of not that it's comparable, but like the Hardy Boys books, each one's their own story, but they're part of a series, right? But the new the books do progress in the sense that you should probably read them in order if you're going to read them, because Under the Water kind of gives some spoilers and mentions some things about Under the Bluff. So if you hadn't read Under the Bluff yet, you lose out on this big plot twist that happens about halfway through that book.
Yeah.
So they could feasibly be read out of order, but it is suggested that they are read in order so you don't spoil everything for yourself.
Right. I would ideally think that it would be better to read the first book first as well, because I didn't spend as much time on character, I didn't have to completely introduce characters the second time around. They're already, assume that people know a little something about them. So there's less background and things like that.
So, and second book, that's a thing. I'll say that's a thing. It's a thing for me writing the second book. And you and I kind of touched on it when we were just kind of visiting before the interview. Did you struggle when you first started the second book with the feeling of I don't know if I can do this again? Because I know for me, it was something where I wanted to, but the ideas didn't flow. Now I'm in a flow where I'm like, this is the best. But did you struggle with that?
I think that for me, I had an idea of what the second book could be after the first book came out, but I wanted to see if it was going to be successful at all. And when it started getting good reviews and was selling a decent amount of copies, I decided that I wanted to get that second book started. When I started the second book, I really liked the way it started, and I was really flowing good with it for a while. And I got through a first draft without too much difficulty, but it was short. It needed more. There needed to be more story to it. And there was a lot that changed in the initial draft as well. The original idea, I had the original outline, and some things related to how the story would flow changed as I wrote it. So I had to then go back and rewrite a lot of stuff to make that work. And I think the hardest part with the second book was when I got down to editing it and rewrites. That was kind of the part where I was like, when I was doing it. That was definitely where the writer hangover hit me, was when I got to having to do that again.
Right.
Yeah, it feels like starting out has never felt bad for me, but when I get back to the editing phase, I'm like, oh my gosh, why am I doing this again?
Why did I torture myself?
It's fascinating. And did you plan on it being a video books when you started, or were you just like, I'm going to write this first one and then it kind of flow after that?
Totally, I'm going to write this first one. I'm going to see how it goes. This might be the only book I ever write. But when I finished it and I published it, I had some ideas about what a sequel could look like, and I had just a very rough idea of what that would be. But a lot of people read that first book, and people I know, as well as people I met through social media, were like, I really like this. You need to keep going. I want to read another book by you. I think you should write another book. And so I was kind of encouraged to start writing that second book. So it was about a month and a half after the first book came out that I started work on the second book. And like I said, I had an idea of what the story would be like for that one. I kind of had a clue in my mind as to how it would flow and things like that. The third book, I wasn't sure if I was ever going to get to a third book, because by the time I was getting, I don't know, it was probably around December of last year, I wrote this short story for Christian Francis's anthology, which kind of got the creative juices flowing again, and I was still in the editing phase with the second book, and I was really tired of that. And I thought, well, why don't I just give this third story a try? I have a couple ideas, and I'm going to start putting stuff down on paper and see what it looks like. And I ended up writing the first draft of that really fast. Like, I don't know why I wrote it in a very short period of time, like 2 or 3 months. I wrote that first draft of the third book. And it was a length that I was happy with, and I was pretty satisfied with the story. And I sent a rough draft to a friend of mine who does a lot of art reading for me, and she actually said it was her favorite of the 3 books. So, so there you go. But I didn't know if I was going to do the third book. I kind of was pretty sure I was going to do the second book after the first one had been out for a month or so, but I wasn't sure about a third. But there's going to be a third now. So
It's always fun to see how that evolves. You start out and you're like, it could be one book, and then you get to the end of that and you're like, I could stay in this role just a little bit longer. And then you get to the third and you're like, it's not an even number. It's like, let's just do it. It's crazy how those daydreams get away from you, though. And you're starting with, hey, like, you're exploring, right?
say that again.
I said your book, like your idea, kind of got started with cave exploring.
I am still having trouble hearing you. Sorry, say that one more time.
Did you get started, like get your ideas going cave exploring?
Yes, I did. Sorry, I was having trouble hearing it. The phone was a little bit tinny, so. But yeah, the whole inspiration for the first book in particular was from my own experiences exploring and sort of checking out these old abandoned caves in St. Paul and other parts of the state. Something I still do. I've been in, trying to think, 4 new ones this summer that I went and explored, one of which I had to hike through uncharted woods for about an hour and 20 minutes because it was basically, the cave was down a bluff, but all the property at the top of the bluff was private property, so you couldn't just hike down. So I had to actually go into this nature park and then kind of hike through. I was like crossing streams and all kinds of stuff to find this one particular cave. This summer, it was quite the adventure. And then, yeah, I found a new one down in Red Wing that was really big, and I explored another one just about a week ago, too, that was recently reopened. So, so I'm still continuing to do that just as like a hobby and something fun to do and a good way to get exercise. But, I was definitely inspired by the first book in particular was inspired by my own experiences exploring these abandoned caves. And although there's some stuff to do with the caves in the second book, it's not so much. It's still definitely inspired by the Twin Cities area in Minnesota. There's a lot of stuff having to do with locations and places in Minnesota. And the third book really doesn't have anything to do with caves at all. I was like, well, I can't do another book that has something to do with caves. I've got to do something different here. So the third book really doesn't have any cave stuff at all. So that one was just kind of basically my wife threw an idea at me one night, and she said, what if there's a serial killer who does this? And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to use that. And then that kind of got the story going for that one.
That's cool.
That's really, really cool. So we obviously were not kid when you were working on Under the Bluffs. So I'm not sure about how the time frame worked here, but how long did it take for you to write Under the Bluffs to writing Under the Water?
Under the Bluffs probably should have taken a little longer than it did, because the really early draft of that book that I put out, and granted, it was my first time publishing, so there's a learning curve there. And the first maybe the first couple of weeks that book was out, I realized that I had more editing to do, and I very quickly rushed to do some changes and make some corrections. And even as far back as last October, I put on a new version of the book that was newly formatted with a new cover and stuff like that. So that book was almost like an available work in progress for the first 4 months or so, because I was still learning. Now there's a really great version of that book out, but so the first book probably should have taken longer than it did. I'm trying to think. I started that book in, I think, September or so, maybe August of 2022, and it came out in April 2023. Whereas the second book, I started in around May of 2023, and it came out April of 2024. So in terms of time length from when I started it and when it released, the second book took longer, but I think that's because I took more time and caution with editing it, making sure it was formatted nicely, making sure the cover was right and everything else. So I wasn't in as much of a rush to get a book out there. I wanted to really take my time and make sure that it was good. And that's kind of what I'm doing with the third book now. I mean, I've probably gone through the third book 20 or 30 times. I mean, my books aren't super long. They're all around 200, 210 pages. So it doesn't take me an incredibly long amount of time to go through a draft, but it'll take me a week or so if I do a chapter or two a day. But the third book will have been over a year before that one's released. So I feel like I'm actually taking a little longer each time I write one. The first draft, however, the drafts though, the first draft of the books come out really faster each time. Getting that first draft, start to finish, done seems to go faster for me each time I start a new book. It's just the editing process I'm being more slow and methodical about these days.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. You know each other, so you know the process by which my Origins went through, where I had this draft that went out for the first few months, and then I released Origins Redux, which was a redo of that, which was much prettier, much better formatted, stuff like that. It sounds to me like you have a better understanding of how the process works now, and so you understand that it's a good idea to have alpha readers or beta readers or people to say, hey, this doesn't make sense, so it does slow that down a little bit. Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, if it's a better product, I think it's better to take your time, and that's kind of the beginning.
Yeah, the second book, when the first book, I wrote it, and my friend, she's a very avid reader, and she knows her books, and she had read maybe 50 or 100 pages of Under the Bluffs. And she's like, yeah, I think it's good. You could add this or add that, but you didn't read through the entire thing. And then I was too impatient to wait for my wife to go through it and edit it, so I published it before I should have. So, but the second book, I didn't do that. My friend Heidi read it and actually read the entire thing and had a lot of things. She was like, I like this, I don't like this, this needs more of that. I think you should do something with this and change it over to this. And so she gave me a lot of suggestions on that second book. And so I had to go through and do a lot of rewrites to make those things work. And that made the story a lot longer. I added a lot to it. And then my wife went through and did her edits. And then I started using my favorite editing trick that I've learned since publishing my first book. And that is to open up MS Word, go to the review section, and let the AI read the book out loud to me as I read through it. I catch more mistakes and more little errors that way than anything. Even after going through it multiple times, I'll still catch new stuff that just needs to be tweaked a little bit. Sometimes it's like, just a matter of like missing an A in a word or something, something really simple like that. But so I'm a lot more cautious with that process now. And then I have somebody who is helping me with formatting the books once I get them done and doing the covers for me and stuff like that as well. So,
and that's good. It's good to know that after you get the first one out, it's okay to go back and make corrections. But when you're on to that second one, to take that wealth of knowledge that you can make those changes.
Right.
Because I definitely see that with Odysseia as well compared to Origins. I feel like the writing is getting better. And that trick, having the AI read it back to you, is so smart. I can't tell you how many times I've read through the story like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And my wife reads it and she's like, you put the word apricot instead of appreciate here. And I'm like, man, had I read it, had someone read it to me that told me that.
You would know that that's apricot.
Right? So.
Yeah, it works. It does. It really does. The other thing, what was I going to say? I was thinking about something I was talking about. I lost my train of thought there.
It's all right.
All right. So, Nick, do you want to tell us what you can find under the bluffs and under the water, and where people can find you?
Yeah, first and foremost, if you just go to my profile, there is a link that will take you directly to Under the Bluffs, right on my TikTok profile, so you can find it right there. Otherwise, if you just go into Amazon and search Under the Bluffs, or at worst, Under the Bluffs by Nicholas Grady, you'll find the first book. They are kind of linked, so if you scroll down, you'll usually see an option to buy both books together or to see the second book, so you can find that as well. So you can pretty easily find them on Amazon these days.
Cool. Well, I'm SF Rogers. You can find Execration of Autumn on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. I'm working on the second book, Isolation of Winter. Yeah.
I am Pete Golden. My book, Origins Redux, is available on Amazon right now. You can get it paperback, hardback, Kindle. I am working on an audiobook solution for that, getting that all ironed out. Odysseia, I'm looking at getting it out. The second book, getting it out October 14th. Be on the lookout for that. So we'll be on the way there.
This has been the Chaos. We're glad that you joined us today.
Thank you so much.